Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria, has often been called the best king England or Britain has never had. But who was Prince Albert, and exactly what role did he play in British history? I recently told the story about how Prince Albert helped to prevent a war between the USA and Britain in the 1860s, and loads of you got in touch asking me to tell a little bit more about him. So here is a brief overview of Prince Albert, his life, his impact on Britain, and his legacy. I hope you enjoy it. Prince Albert was born on the 26th of August 1819 in the small German principality of Saxe-Coburg, Gotha, which now lies at the very northern edge of Bavaria. He and his future wife were actually cousins. His father, Ernest, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg Gotha, was one of 9 children, and one of Ernest's sisters, who happened to be called Victoria, had married the Duke of Kent, son of King George III. They had a daughter, also called Victoria, who was born 4 months before Albert, over there in Germany. In 1837, upon the death of her uncle, William IV, this young Victoria ascended the throne of the United Kingdom. Duke Ernest also had a younger brother, Leopold, who in 1831 was proclaimed king of the newly created Belgium. But before that, he had very nearly ended up being the consort to the Queen of England, although not Victoria. In 1816, Leopold had married Charlotte, Princess of Wales, the daughter of George III's eldest son, the future George IV, probably more famously known as the Prince Regent. Just 1 year later, aged 21, Charlotte had died in childbirth, leaving Leopold a widow and George III without any legitimate grandchildren. It was in the mad rush to now produce an heir that Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent, and now in his 50s, married Leopold's sister, Victoria of Saxe-Coburg, 20 years his junior. Whilst the young Princess Victoria was being groomed to sit on the throne of Britain, Albert, who had an older brother, was the spare in a very small dukedom in Germany. The advantage this did give him was the opportunity to pursue academic and artistic interests for their own sake. He attended the University of Bonn, where he studied law, political economy, philosophy, and the history of art. So, when his cousin Victoria was ascending the British throne, aged 18, Albert was touring Italy, adding to his knowledge of both art and architecture. Meanwhile, Uncle Leopold, now remarried as well as the King of the Belgians, had not lost his interest in tying his royal family in Saxe-Coburg into the British monarchy, and he arranged for Albert to visit London in 1838. Victoria and Albert hit it off, and in October of that year, Victoria proposed. They were married at St James's Palace in February 1840 and would be married for 21 years. Their marriage, however, was not met with universal approval in Britain. There was a general anti-foreigner and anti-German sentiment within the population, and especially within the aristocratic classes. Albert now occupied an interesting position in the British Constitution. There hadn't been a king consort for over 100 years. As he recorded in his diary, "The Constitution is silent as to the consort of the Queen." The Queen's Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, advised against giving him the title King Consort, and the landed classes in Parliament objected to him being created a Duke, because that would enable him to sit in the House of Lords and therefore participate in the running of the country. Instead, he was given the title His Royal Highness and left to find a role for himself, not dissimilar to Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, just over 100 years later. Serious and more introvert rather than the extrovert that he was married to, Albert could come across as reserved and a bit too clever and hard-working for many in the aristocracy. And whilst his ideas of hard work, professionalism, the benefits of education, science and industry might not endear him to the aristocracy, they did resonate with the emerging British middle classes. Together with the couple's youthful energy and a rapidly expanding family, they were a complete break with the rakish behaviour of her many uncles, the sons of George III, epitomised by the Prince Regent. Their first child, Victoria, was born in November 1840, followed by a son and heir to the throne, Albert, or Bertie, 12 months later. He would succeed his mother as King Edward VII. Victoria and Albert were to have 9 children over the next 17 years, all of whom survived into adulthood, which was quite remarkable in the 19th century, even within a royal family. With her repeated pregnancies, Queen Victoria started to rely on Albert to take some of the work strain, and he took on the role of Sovereign Secretary. Never an official position, it was one that had been filled before by some of George III's sons. And in this role, he would read correspondence addressed to the monarch, attend meetings with the Queen, sometimes on her behalf, and responded to government ministers. The clerk to the Privy Council, Charles Greville, said of Prince Albert, quote, "He is king in all intents and purposes." Slowly he accepted that whilst he was, to use his words, only the husband, not the master in the house, he used his influence on the Queen to subtly modify her stances, not least in raising the monarchy above the partisan warfare in Parliament. Historically, her predecessors had shown favouritism to either the Whig or Tory factions. And this careful steering between the factions elevated the monarchy into something that was less partisan and more symbolic of the nation as a whole. With their resonance with middle-class values, although whether they were reflecting them or shaping them is debatable, their young family and their dedication to public duty, Victoria and Albert's popularity soared, and they became trendsetters. That trend-setting was helped in no small part by the growth of the mass media. And one trend in particular is credited to Albert, introducing the Christmas tree to Britain. Actually, that's one of those historical myths that's often quoted as a fact. Whilst he did indeed bring a Christmas tree to Windsor Castle in 1840, it was actually another German married into the British royal family, Queen Charlotte, the wife of George III, who put up the first known Christmas tree 40 years earlier. But no one really knew or cared about her tree. And then in 1848, the London Illustrated News featured a picture of Albert, Victoria and their children gathered around his Christmas tree at Windsor. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be in on the act, and within 10 years, a Christmas tree was a festive fixture in most middle-class homes. And from there, like a lot of other Christmas traditions from this period, it cascaded down to the working class. But the trendsetter for Christmas trees was not the sort of role that Prince Albert desired. A bright man, he believed that with his education and talents, he had more to offer. With his hard work ethic and interest in the arts, education and the plight of the less fortunate in society, Prince Albert started to find public roles as an outlet for his talents. For instance, he was president of the Society for the Improvement of the Condition of the Labouring Classes, a pressure group founded by Lord Shaftesbury in 1830. And whilst it can seem rather paternalistic when viewed through modern eyes, the idea that the haves should care for the have-nots was groundbreaking at the time. Those of you who've watched or listened to my episode about the Cato Street conspiracy might recall just how divided and uncaring British society was less than 20 years before Victoria came to the throne. Despite coming from a royal family, admittedly a small principality or duchy, Prince Albert did have liberal views. Not only did he also accept the presidency of the Society for the Extinction of Slavery, but he spoke up on issues such as education and supported Robert Peel's attempts to repeal the Corn Laws. The political battle to repeal the tariffs on imported corn, which both ensured landowners' profits and also kept food prices for the working classes high, was bitter. On one side, the Anti-Corn Law League, and on the other, the vested interests of the landed classes, heavily represented in Parliament, especially in the House of Lords. In 1846, Albert attended a debate on the Corn Laws in the House of Commons, sitting in the Visitors' Gallery, in what was a very obvious and visible gesture of support to the Prime Minister fighting for the abolition, Sir Robert Peel. His presence at the debate was attacked by Lord George Bentinck, one of the leading aristocratic Conservatives. In fact, Lord George's intervention was the first time he had spoken in the House of Commons for 18 years. Now, that's a dedicated MP, isn't it? The laws were repealed with the support of opposition members of Parliament, but it doomed Peel's premiership as his Conservative Party split between free traders and protectionists. Another body that Albert accepted the role of president of was the Royal Society of Arts. During Albert's presidency, its membership nearly tripled. But being president of various learned societies was laudable, but it didn't enable him to have any real impact on public policy. That all changed in 1841, when he was appointed chairman of the Royal Commission in charge of redecorating the new Palace of Westminster after the Houses of Parliament had burned down in 1834. As chairman of a Royal Commission, he was now in a government-endorsed position. Unfortunately, rather than soaring, he now found himself in a running battle with Charles Barry, the architect. Barry decided to decorate rooms in his own style with no reference to the commission, claiming that the decoration was actually part of the architectural design. It was a frustrating setback for Prince Albert. He did, however, make his own mark on architecture when, in 1844, using their private finances, he and the Queen purchased Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. Working with Thomas Cubitt, he designed an Italianate villa, which is open to the public nowadays. His other private building project was at Balmoral in Scotland. In 1848, Prince Albert signed the lease on the castle without even visiting it, as a bolt hole away from the pressures of London. Fortunately, when he and his wife finally did arrive in the Scottish Highlands in September 1848, they fell in love with it. In 1852, Victoria and Albert were left a significant sum of money by a well-known miser in his day, John Neild. About £500,000 in those days' money. Having paid all of Neild's servants, as he hadn't bothered to include them in his will, the royal couple then used the legacy to purchase the freehold of Balmoral from the Duke of Fife, and it remains the royal family's private bolt hole in Scotland to this day. Now, before I go on, I just want to quickly tell you about my old friends at Restless who are sponsoring this show. They are a digital learning community for the over 50s, and they gave me my first break as the History Chap even before I'd had a video on YouTube. So we go back a long way. Apart from history stories from people like me, they also have programmes on art, travel, science, fitness and health, cooking and learning languages, to name but a few. So if you're still scratching your head thinking of a last-minute Christmas present for someone who loves learning, then how about getting them a 12-month membership of Restless? The best bit is because I've worked with them for several years, they're offering a 20% saving on the usual 12-monthly programme. Click on the link appearing now or in the description below. And now, let's get back to Prince Albert. In 1847, Albert was elected Chancellor of the University of Cambridge, a position he would hold until his death 14 years later. He used his influence as Chancellor to expand subjects taught to include modern history and natural sciences. 2 years previously, he'd also helped establish the Royal College of Chemistry. Slowly, in a whole series of positions and projects, Albert was making his mark, and, despite his German origins, earning respect. But if there was a high point, and indeed legacy, of Prince Albert's life, it was the Great Exhibition of 1851. Whilst it wasn't the first industrial exposition, there'd been one held in Paris in 1844, it was on an altogether larger scale, and was also the very first World Trade Fair, with 44 countries, along with British colonies, exhibiting alongside the very best of Britain's Industrial Revolution. The idea of the exhibition had been raised by the Royal Society of Arts, of which Albert was the president, and in 1850 the government established yet another Royal Commission to oversee the delivery of this ambitious project, and they asked Prince Albert to lead it. Once more in charge of a Royal Commission, this time he was to have a major impact on his adopted country. And the most obvious initial impact was the huge glasshouse exhibition centre constructed in London's Hyde Park. The brainchild of Joseph Paxton, the enormous structure, at 1,800 feet in length and 180 feet high, was 3 times the size of St Paul's Cathedral. It took just 9 months for this Crystal Palace to move from an idea to being opened by Queen Victoria. Despite fears that it would be a focal point for civil unrest or even crowd-spreading diseases, the Great Exhibition proved a towering success. It ran for 5.5 months through the summer of 1851, during which time 6 million visitors entered the Crystal Palace. To put that into perspective, the population of Great Britain at this time was roughly 20 million. The Great Exhibition was also an enormous commercial success, turning in a profit of £186,000 in those days' money. Albert persuaded his fellow commissioners to invest the majority of these profits into the purchase of 86 acres of land to the south of Hyde Park in Kensington for the establishment of a cultural centre to promote science, the arts and learning. Nicknamed Albertopolis, this site would eventually house the Science Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Natural History Museum, the Royal College of Art, the Royal College of Music, Imperial College, and the Royal Albert Hall. In 1857, the Queen granted him a new title, the Prince Consort. With relatives in various royal families across Europe, Albert had a keen eye on the shifting diplomacy on the continent. He was also more conciliatory in his approach to international relations than the Prime Minister in the late 1850s, Lord Palmerston. He was keen to use his brood of children to create a greater peace and understanding in Europe by marrying them into various royal families. The first such marriage alliance was between their eldest daughter, Vicky, and the Crown Prince of Prussia in 1858. Albert was particularly close to Vicky, and whilst he saw the marriage as part of a wider scheme for peace, the departure of his daughter to Berlin made him unhappy and seemed to coincide with a decline in his health. If he was close to Vicky, the Princess Royal, the same couldn't be said for the relationship with his eldest son, the future Edward VII. In November 1861, despite being ill, Albert went to Cambridge to read the Riot Act to his son, who was at that stage conducting a scandalous affair with an Irish actress, Nellie Clifton. During his journey to Cambridge, Albert is reported to have caught a chill. Now, despite his pre-existing health problems, Queen Victoria blamed her eldest son for Albert's subsequent death. The reality, however, was that Prince Albert's health had been deteriorating for some time. For the previous 2 years, he had complained of rheumatism, toothache and stomach pains. In 1860, he had suffered from a fever, which he believed was cholera. Coupled with whatever health problems he had, he was famous for overworking and failing to delegate. For instance, in 1860, when the Prince of Wales visited Canada, Albert took it upon himself to write all of his son's speeches, despite the fact that aides were employed to do exactly that. Albert seemed to be a warrior too, not least when looking after the welfare of his wife and family. The death of Queen Victoria's mother in March 1861 had put a huge strain on the Queen, and by default on Albert as he tried to support her. As 1861 progressed, several people in royal circles felt that he seemed almost to have lost the will to live. And yet, despite his failing health, in November 1861, Albert played the key role in diffusing the Trent affair between the USA and Britain. And I've told that story in a separate episode, so please check it out at the end. On the 9th of December, he was diagnosed with typhoid. He died shortly before 11 p.m. on the 14th of December 1861 at Windsor Castle. He was just 42 years old. Whilst the official cause of his death was typhoid, modern medical experts point to the variety of ailments that he had been suffering from for several years, especially those stomach pains, and suggest that he was suffering from something far more chronic than typhoid, possibly Crohn's disease, renal failure, or even cancer. He was buried at the Royal Mausoleum, Frogmore, which is in the grounds of Windsor Castle. Future Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli spoke for many when he wrote, "We have buried our sovereign. This German prince has governed England for 21 years with a wisdom and energy such as none of our kings have ever shown." His political rival, William Gladstone, concluded that Albert was never popular with the smart society, but rather with the hard-working, industrious middle class. Whether he reflected them, or they reflected him and his wife, is probably one of those chicken and egg debates. Queen Victoria never recovered from his death, and for the next 40 years of her life remained in a state of mourning, famously always wearing black. Albert's rooms in all their houses were kept as if he was still alive, with hot water brought in the morning and linen and towels changed daily. And that image of the mourning queen pretending Albert is still alive sort of became one of his legacies. And yet, he had a more serious legacy. In 1875, a 14-foot gilded statue of the Prince Consort was unveiled overlooking the Royal Albert Hall and his Albertopolis in Kensington, built on the profits of his extraordinary Great Exhibition. And that Great Exhibition, in Paxton's Crystal Palace, was a very visible statement of Britain and her place in the world. An urbanised, commercialised, industrialised Great Britain. And when Queen Victoria opened the exhibition in front of 25,000 season ticket holders, Albert had succeeded in placing the ancient institution of the British monarchy at the heart of the vibrant and changing 19th century Britain. In many ways, he helped save the monarchy from the depths that some of the Georgians had taken it to. But for me, his greatest and most visible legacy is looking south from that Albert Memorial. There in front of you stand the iconic institutions that so many Londoners and Britons take for granted, but which were all built due to his successful management of the Great Exhibition. The V&A, Natural History and Science Museums have 12 million visitors a year. In 2023, over 1.5 million people attended concerts and events at the Royal Albert Hall, and Imperial College is home to 23,000 students. And the body established by the Royal Commission to oversee investments of profits from the Great Exhibition continues to provide donations of £2 million a year towards postgraduate scholarships at universities across Britain and abroad. Put together, that is some legacy. Well, I hope you enjoyed that insight into the life of Albert, the Prince Consort. Over this festive period, why not settle down and watch some more of my videos? I've got over 200 on my channel. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.